Hey, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the June meeting of the Board of Directors for the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. May we have roll call?
Director Hoffman.
Here.
Director Adams.
Here.
Director Edwards.
Here.
Director Evans.
Here.
Director Burns.
Here.
Director Riley.
Here.
And Director Potter.
Here.
All present.
Wonderful. All right. Director Edwards, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So a few notes. We do have a pretty lengthy agenda tonight, so I'd like to be able to like to get through it all this evening. So I would ask the folks that are in the front room, if there's any of you that would like to come forward for public comment at any point during the meeting when there is public comment, that you enter the room sooner rather than later. You don't need to wait, just to come on in and get in the line for the lectern. So first thing, we'll start with oral communications. Anyone wishing to?
Before oral communications, could I just make a comment about the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just want to point out that the second item on this agenda it has been noticed under the Brown Act as a time-limited presentation by representative of California American Water. It is not the time for discussion, it's not the time for comment, and certainly it's not the time for any action by this board. That time should be spent listening to the comments that the representatives have. And I wanted to say that in advance of public comment.
Would you turn your mic up?
Not working. Is mic on?
Oh, look at this. It's coming. Disconnected.
Oh.
Thank you. You got to start all over, Mr. Laredo.
Yep, from the top.
There we go. Okay. Summarizing, the second item on the agenda is been noticed under the Brown Act as a time-limited presentation by representatives of California American Water. That time is dedicated to their presentation to this board. It's not a time for discussion, comment, or action by this board. I wanted to say that in advance of oral communications so that if anybody has a comment that they wanted to make, they're not going to have an opportunity to comment on the presentation itself. That would happen at a future meeting. But I wanted you, the board, staff, to know that this is not the time for comments on the presentation. We are in a receiving mode.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, before I open it up for oral communications, I want to ask, are there any changes or corrections to the agenda?
Just to note that you were all delivered a budget staff note and packet, should have been on Friday, and that substitutes for I think it was item 29 in the packet that you received the day before. The one that's posted on the website has been updated.
And Madam Chair, it's been asked if people could speak directly into the microphone. They have the volume is up all the way and they can barely hear when some people speak.
Okay, I hope I'm not that some person. Thank you. Be sure to do so. Okay, so now I would like to open it up for oral communications. Anyone wishing to address the board on any matters not on the agenda this evening may do so at this time.
Melody Crislock, Public Water Now. So, during the Measure J campaign, tonight's presenters, Joe Connor and George Sonoff, wrote an op-ed in the Herald titled "The Long and Winding Road." The article concluded with this statement: "In the end, the vast majority of cases do not result in a government takeover, leaving taxpayers holding the bag to pay for litigation expenses that are entirely avoidable. The only 4 buyouts that Public Water Now was aware of had all succeeded, so I wondered about the truth of that statement when it was made about a year ago. I contacted Food and Water Watch to see if they had the details on this vast number of public buyouts that had failed. They were puzzled. They could only think of 1 or 2 cases where the courts had ruled against a public agency on the right to take, Claremont being one of them. They said it was notable because it was rare for a city to lose. Here's the list that they sent me from their research, which I've given all of you copies of. It shows 400 successful public buyouts of private water systems between 1990 and 2015. If you include Ojai and Missoula buyouts after 2015, that's a total of 411 successful public buyouts compared to 1 failure, Claremont. Considering the outrageous cost that CalAm thinks nothing of forcing us to pay, $64 million for water we didn't use, $34 million for failed projects, 22% increase just recently on the books, on top of the most expensive water in the country, it certainly seems like CalAm is the risk that we really can't afford to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crislott. Anyone else wishing to address the board?
Dan Turner, Monterey. I would like to know by what right it's been decided that I can't make a comment on CalAm's attorneys and what they're likely to say. You have the rule that says that if something's on the agenda, you speak to it at that time. But you said we can't speak to it at that time. So you're telling me that I can't speak about this now?
This is the time to do so.
Oh, good. Then never mind. Well, CalAm's legal eagles are here to tell us why going up against them in court would be like walking into a buzzsaw. They'll just chew us up and spit us out. You know, ordinarily they don't give any warning like this, but because they're working for CalAm, a corporation that loves us very much, they've decided to give us this warning, much as you warn small children who are about to do something foolish. Richard Hodges was the driving force behind Ojai's successful municipalization, big word, of its water. He was the general manager of the water district at Ojai joined, the Casitas Municipal Water District. And he told me that one of the people on his board of directors was a fairly right-wing reactionary pro-corporate type, and Hodges wasn't sure if the guy would support moving toward public water. However, Hodges told me that after Golden State Water's attorneys addressed his board in the arrogant, condescending manner that comes so naturally to them, and warned his board of the misery that lay before them if they had the temerity to try to get rid of Golden State and incorporate Ojai into its water distribution system, that conservative board member said to Hodges that from then on, he was on Hodges's side all the way. It seems he didn't cotton to being spoken to that way. I hope you guys will have a similar reaction. Then again, maybe our boys have gone to charm school since then and have learned to deliver their message in a less patronizing manner. We'll soon find out. So, while they're trying to scare the bejesus out of you about how much it'll cost to get rid of CalAm, let's not forget about how much it will cost us to keep CalAm. The best we can figure out from figures CalAm files with the PUC and other places is that it costs CalAm about $45 million to deliver a year to supply us with our water. But they collect about $60 or $65 million a year from us. So that's somewhere between $15 and $25 million a year, every year, year after year, that we are paying as a community that we wouldn't have to pay if we got rid of CalAm and had a public agency to deliver our water. That's why I'm in favor of getting rid of CalAm. And now, let's hear what the boys have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Michael Bear, good evening, everyone. I have some things to say about the upcoming presentation, but first I have something that I think is more important. So I've been to most of these presentations, the monthly meetings, and listened to the general manager report and talk about the water budget. And it seems that there's some wiggle room in the milestones, that we could afford to miss the first milestone and take on 1,000 acre-foot hit, and because of the credits through ASR and other sorts of things, that we wouldn't get hammered right away. Like if we missed the September milestone, we wouldn't go to rationing October, November. We've got a cushion. This is before Pure One, which is coming online with 3,500 acre feet, allegedly July, August, September, pretty soon. And I understand they got to put it in the ground for 6 months before we can use it. So what's coming up with the desal plant is a lot of decision makers are making decisions in July, particularly, and in the next few weeks. And so I think it's incumbent on this board, this director, this agency, to let these other decision makers know it is not the end of the world if we miss the September milestone. We won't immediately go into rationing. We have enough water for the next year. The next milestone might be a problem. Might not be if we get pure water. But this September, it's not a problem. So the State Water Resources Control Board, the Central Coast Regional Quality Water Board, the California Coastal Commission, and the Board of Supervisors. Cal-Am's been saying, the sky is falling. We're going to hit a milestone. We're going to go to rationing. It's going to be the end of the world. Well, that may be true in September of 2020, but it's not true this year. And this is the agency that follows that. This is the agency that knows that. And I believe the board should direct the director to let the world know where we are, because these agencies have critical decisions facing them, and they need information. They need the best information, and you are holding some of it. Let us agencies know where we are on this September milestone. I've used all my time, so I won't be talking about what's upcoming.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Chairwoman Evans and the board. My name is Susan Schiavone. I live in Seaside. Lamb wants to set the stage for us to be afraid of true consideration for a buyout so that we may have a publicly owned water supply. They want to point to selective history to instill fear. They want doubt in the board and the public's mind that this cannot be successful and we will only pay even water if we try. Do not say that over 400 communities in the U.S. have taken back their water. Do not admit that over time, publicly owned water agencies produce savings for ratepayers. They do not mention the history of failures they have and that they have taken credit for all the efforts done by the Water Management District. They do not mention the extreme profits made from our extremely high water costs, inflating the worth of the company's assets to discourage us. Please do not let scare tactics distract you or deter you from pursuing an honest, reality-based evaluation process for feasibility. Thank you for your hard work on this project.
Thank you.
Good evening, board. Mary Ann Carbone, and with Sam City resident, and I had a comment that I wasn't going to come up, but even though the PUC has acted favorably towards the regional desal plant, you cannot take your eyes off of the ball. We need to be vigilant and aggressive participants in the discussions of the water management's implementation of Measure J. We must argue for the board to have public discussion of the definition of feasibility before any other actions or on the analysts are taken. We must demand that the Water Management District provide a clear statement of their arguments for the public necessity of condemnation so that the public has some sense of the probability of success. We have been very responsible and cost-effective in our use of public monies as we have accomplished our job at the Water Authority. We must request and demand that the Water Management District provide the budget estimates of the true expected cost, range of the feasibility study, the cost of litigation, condemnation, assuming a win and assuming a loss, public necessity trial, and the range of costs associated with actual acquisition, assuming public necessity is demonstrated as it goes to jury trial for this setting of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Carbone. Anyone else wishing to address the board? Okay, then I would like to close oral communications and move to the next item on the agenda, which is a presentation by Joe Connor and George Sonoff, California American Water, regarding considerations for feasibility. This will be a 20-minute presentation.
Thank you. Can you pull our Well, that's pulling up. I'll go ahead and say thank you for allowing us to be here this evening. Didn't know we were going to have such a warm welcome. But it's always good to come into a community, and I want to just explain just briefly about who we are. I'm Joe Connor. I've addressed this board before and met with several of you individually over the years. I'm with Baker Donaldson. My home office is out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is my colleague, George Sonoff, with Manat, Phelps, and Phillips. And he and I have been engaged by California American Water to represent them in regard to this initiative that took the form of Measure J, is now going through your process. And so that's why we're here this evening. And it's not to threaten. It's not to besmirch anyone. It's to, I think it was said this evening, you need the facts. And there are some facts out there. I think that you have hired consultants. I know you have. I've been keeping up with what you've been doing and what your attorneys have been doing just from the public records, as well as talking with our clients. So I know you're going through a deliberative process. And that's why we wanted to address you today and kind of see have this opportunity before your feasibility analyses come in. I believe it's next month. So let's go ahead and get started. This is our little PowerPoint we put together. You've seen this slide before. Won't go over it in very much detail, but I think it's very important to see where California American has operations, primary operations, and you can see that Monterey is a very significant part of our overall state system, and there's not a lot around it with respect to other high concentrations. So the facts about the California system, you've seen that before as well.
Sir, could you talk into the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll try. Thank you, David. I'm a trial lawyer, so I kind of have a problem with moving around sometimes. The facts about the Monterey District and its assets. It's very important to consider this as you take your information that you receive and your recommendations into account. It is a very, very complex system. That's fact of the matter. We serve 13 communities, 55 plus square miles, over 40,000 connections, over 600 miles of water mains, 3,000 hydrants. The water source, and we don't have a desal plant right now, but it will be built. It will be built. There are 36 active wells, groundwater and surface water. You know the water supply as well, probably I'm sure better than I do. Significant storage in this system. That's why the water issues that we've had and source issues that we've had to build a significant network of storage tanks, over 35 million gallons, 70 pump stations, which means we have a tremendous number of pressure zones just due to the terrain. Over 100 employees that work for the company here in this area, and we took down a dam with the help of many in the community and as well as many organizations. The San Clemente Dam, the Los Padres Dam is still there, and I know that you're still doing analysis on what should go forth with that dam. But what you don't see in some lists of property is the other assets that we have that will need to be considered as you move forward. Real property, 112 parcels with over 3,400 acres. Easements, private easements. This isn't right-of-way. These are private easements, dedicated easements, 1,259 covering 439 acres. That's a significant. Water rights. We still have and will continue to have water rights, even with the desal plant. And our calculation is approximately a little over 4,000 acre feet of water rights. There are regulatory assets that are on the books as well. There's something called CWIP, construction work in progress. Now, at any different point in time, you're going to have a different number. As of January the 3rd, or June the 30th of 2018, that was $119 million of work in progress. And then the issue of the desalination plant. And again, that's as you all know, that is more than just the plant itself. It's the pipeline, the slant wells, all the other assets, valves, things that go with that. Approximately $329 million. With your own timeline, I think that you talked about at your last meeting, we're looking at 2 years potentially before any action's even taken. And if the plant's not built by then, it will be built soon thereafter. So that's another thing to take into consideration. The main thing I wanted to focus on, again, is go back and look at a little history, and just this is from your records and following what you've done in the process. You had 5 listening sessions in January. Cost savings was key to feasibility. That was apparent in all the materials that I saw as I went back through this. And then the campaign, what was the public promised? What we went back and looked at is really the campaign promised proponents of Measure J, transparency and ownership without raising cost, and if the price is too high, the takeover will be deemed not feasible. And this is an excerpt from Public Water Now's website. Just in its own words, if the price is too high, there will be no buyout. The process would stop. It's not a blank check. We'll hold public hearings, which have been done. The feasibility study will be paid for by the district out of their reserves. And then we've also seen evidence that the study might be paid for from the water supply charge, Ordinance 152. But one thing that your eminent domain lawyers said, and this came out in the February 19th meeting, is that the district ownership must result in early cost savings. That's very important in going forward in this proceeding. You voted to hire 3 consulting firms, but those details have been held in confidence for now. And then in March, the March meeting, there was a March 5th closed meeting of consultants and condemnation lawyers and district representatives. But out of this, the lawyers emphasized again the need to demonstrate early savings in the cost of service. And then what is the standard for feasibility? That was really the purpose of the listening session. So this is the standard that was in your set forth in the meeting in the March 2019 meeting. The standard for feasible to be a combination of cost, quality of service, and governance that could successfully demonstrate public necessity in a bench trial in the opinion of the consulting team. I want to stress that that's the consulting team. Is that the public? And George is going to mention a few things regarding the reports that you're expected to hear. But I want to talk about severance damages. And I do have some history with respect to severance damages. I represented the Pennachuck Water Company in 2008 through 2010 and 11. And in that case, there was 3 satellite systems. And the Pennachuck system was acquired, or they tried to be acquired by the city of Nashua in a condemnation proceeding. The court advised that they could not take over those 3 systems, and the award was $40 million for severance damages just for those 3 systems. $40 million. In addition to that, the system was valued at $203 million, a 25,000 customer system. Vastly more than was presented by the city of Nashua at the time. But what are severance damages? And before I get to this, this is from the district's your own frequently asked questions answers. And in 2018, While the district only has eminent domain jurisdiction over facilities when it's within its boundaries, which would include satellite facilities such as Oak Hills, Carmel Valley Ranch, Spreckles, and such, the disposition of those will completely affect the cost, severance damage, and so forth. This is key, though. The business strategy of how to approach those assets will have to be defined now in a feasibility study and may bear no real resemblance to the ultimate outcome. That's what you have to worry about. And again, that's not a threat. That's from your own information. And we firmly believe that that's the case. Here, these are the potential severance assets that have potential severance damages. And you'll see down at the bottom, desalination plant, slant wells, and pipeline. Folks, whether you take the desal plant or you don't, you're going to pay for it, either through fair market value of the assets or through severance damages and such as that. And here's a good map. I take this map home with you. This will show the district boundaries, or does show the district boundaries, and all our other assets that are outside of those boundaries, as well as the location of the desal plant. Severance damages may include reduction in the value of property not taken, increased operating expenses, loss of economies of scale, loss of use of property, excess capacity in stranded assets, and expenses incurred in developing alternative water sources. Severance damages are real, and they should be considered in conjunction with your evaluation. I'll turn this over to George for the real information.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. The first thing I want to say is that I'm not here to argue that you shouldn't do this, or that this is a horrible idea, or to scare anybody at all. I think that, but what I'm here to do is to point out some things that I would urge you to consider as you go forward. You're a very sophisticated board. You have very sophisticated consultants, but having done this for decades, I believe there are some very important considerations that boards such as yourselves tend to overlook, having been caught up in and engaged in multi-$100,000 consultancy effort to look at a problem like this. I do want to say, with respect to the track record of these kinds of cases, I heard a statement from Food and Water Watch tonight about the hundreds of these cases that succeed. And what I would ask is for someone to point to one in California where there's been a trial and the public agency has succeeded in the right to take a utility. And the reason is that in our eminent domain law, a utility has the ability, has the legal right to have a trial wherein a trial judge decides whether the public interest and necessity requires the project. And that is the language. If in a normal condemnation, in 98% of the condemnations, the vast majority of them that I've handled in my career, there is no such issue. If the government wants to take a piece of your property to widen a road, they pass a resolution of necessity, and you don't have the ability to come into court to say the road should be widened on the other side or some other road should be widened, and the trial judge for the trial judge to decide whether the condemnation should take place. No, all you have a right to is a jury trial as to the amount of just compensation, because under the separation of powers doctrine, a judicial officer, a judge, doesn't interfere with that legislative decision. You are a legislative body. The taking of a utility system for the purpose of using it for the same purpose, to maintain the utility, to municipalize it, is a special case in the eminent domain law, as I'm sure your attorneys have advised you. And in those cases, the utility does have the right to a separate judicial determination, a trial based on evidence, to decide whether the public interest and necessity is served by the taking. So the question I would ask is for them to point to you any case in California in which that's happened and a court has allowed the takeover. And that will be an empty set. There's one case. I tried it for the Golden State Water Company for 2 months in 2016. And the trial judge there rejected that taking after hearing all of the evidence. So whatever Food and Water Watch wants to say, I don't know the rules in the rest of the country, but I know the rules in the state of California, and I know the history of takings of water companies, and this is since 1992, by the way, is when that law was changed, so some 27 years ago now. And here is, from the Claremont case, a quote from the opinion in that case. Now, it's not binding precedent. It's not a court of appeal opinion. It's the trial judge in that case. And one of the arguments that was made, well, we should do this, Your Honor. Look at the asset that the city is going to own. This really critical asset of the wells and the pumps and the water lines and so forth. That is really important for the public to own that. And the judge, in his 40-some page opinion, did point out that public acquisition by eminent domain can't be justified by the fact that you're going to own the valuable asset. It must be, the project must be required, must be a more necessary use, and there must be some significant public benefit incurred. And that is the trial, that is the litigation that will ensue after you finish this intensive investigation that you're doing now, and you decide to go forward. That's the case. And, you know, I've looked at this, and I've seen, you know, in some of the cases you see around the state, there's complaints about, well, the water system reliability or water quality or operations are insufficient. And those are, as you probably know, exist in many places in the state, especially in the smaller systems. And one can certainly imagine that the public interest and necessity could require a taking where it's a water system that is not professionally run. And in this area, which is the most complex area I've ever seen for water supply and water service, you have the opposite. You have the most professional company you could have with assets that have been brought to bear on a very serious problem. And so I look at it and I see, well, it's rates. The rates are higher than anywhere else, and we really want to cut rates, and because we're suffering under the cost of this problem we have. And so I looked at this chart from one of your listening sessions, and it purported to take a look at the cost of service. Okay, well, the cost of service comparison is a way to take a look to see whether rates are likely to go down if you take the system. And I know your financial consultants are digging into the myriad details about appraisal and what assets you're going to take and doing a financial model and a bond model and going to come up with reams of data on cost of service and the idea that, you know, whether you can take it or not, whether you can cut rates. And so that's what this is all about. And one of the things that I saw there is if you look at those bar charts and you look at those bands, the only way that under this preliminary analysis, assuming a $400 million cost of acquisition, which is optimistic, under that analysis, the only way that the cost of service gets below CalAM is if you eliminate income taxes and property taxes. It's the green and I think it's the green and blue bands there on the left side. See, those don't exist under public ownership, and so those drop the bar down so the cost gets a little bit lower. Well, we confronted that in the Claremont case where they made the exact same argument and said we don't have to pay taxes, and we had an extensive argument about that, and I argued to the judge that that is inappropriate for a public entity, a governmental entity, to assert that the power of eminent domain is justified, is legally justified for tax avoidance reasons. That tax policy is not the purview of a city government, certainly income taxes and property taxes of the city government, or for that matter, a public agency like this one, and that it ought to not be considered as a reason for justifying the eminent domain taking. And the judge agreed with us. In fact, during the trial, he said, that's beggaring your neighbor. Somebody has to pay those taxes. To say we're eliminating taxes, so this is in the public interest, he said, I don't want to hear that. That's not a public interest argument that ought to be heard. It ought to not be cognizable. And what he wrote was, the court does not agree with the premise that an eminent domain acquisition of a private utility provides a benefit because the utility under municipal operation will not pay taxes. The tax loss caused when income or property taxes are avoided is merely shifted to other taxpayers, and they pay more in taxes. Tax avoidance is a cost of the acquisition. I wanted to point that out because I want to bring to you some of the things that I don't think you're going to hear from your consultants. I think that you're going to see a financial analysis that says, oh, you don't have to pay taxes, so let's take that into account. And I wanted to point out that that argument is, I think, completely misplaced. And so one of the iterations of the financial analysis they ought to run for you is making up those taxes. That'll be by pilots, payments in lieu of taxes is my guess, what they'll say. I've been down that road. And of course, that requires a vote. You can't just impose a pilot to make up for these lost taxes without passage by the voters. I know you know that your rates are subject to Proposition 218 should you take the system. And your prior slides have noted that there won't be low-income subsidies. You can't do that under Proposition 218 as a low-income subsidy because it costs you just as much to serve a low-income resident as it does a high-income resident. I assume your consultants are going to look at the number of customers who receive CARW, California Assistance with Water Rates, benefits through CalAM, quantify that, and tell you what that hit is going to be to low-income customers. Tiers have to be justified. Can I have 2 more minutes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Tiers have to be justified. Those are conservation tiers. I'm sure you guys understand that and what the problems have been with municipalities trying to charge more to water users simply for using more as a way to conserve. The Claremont was, a financial disaster. I won't go through that slide. They spent $6.4 million. Our client spent $7.6 million. When the taking was rejected, the court ordered, as the law requires, the condominium to pay all of the costs of the utility that owned the system. So it was a $14 million hit to the city of Claremont. They got nothing for it. The lawyers and consultants did well. The company settled and cut them a break on those fees, and those details are on the slide. The last thing I want to say is that this would be the largest eminent domain taking in the history of California. If someone knows of a larger one, I'd like to hear about it. The company's valued this preliminarily at something like $1 billion. I'm sure your appraisers are going to come in with a range. So when they assign a range, let's assume they come in and say, well, it's going to depend on what you're going to take. You're going to take the desal assets, and what are the severance damages, and what's the data value. And I've been down this road in detail as well. And I know that the feasibility consultants, there'll be all kinds of qualifications about, we don't know, it's ultimately to be decided by a jury, here's the rate base, here's the income analysis. So they're going to give you a range. And, say the range comes in like, $250 million to $750 million, whatever their range is. And then they have to run iterations. They'll run the low number, they'll run the mid number, they'll run the high number, and they'll come up with the financial model. I would just ask you and suggest that you ought to say, ask them, why don't you assign probabilities for us, okay? Do a bell curve or something at least, rather than just running these things and saying, okay, there are your numbers, board, decide which one you want to go with. Try to nail them down on what the probabilities will be and what their real opinion is about it. And so I see that my time has expired. The slide there sort of articulates whatever final thoughts I have. I do think this is an existential bet the district case, given the legal fees that are likely to be incurred and the years of distraction and financing. We'll be back before you, I suspect, at some point. And thank you for bearing with me when I talk so fast.
Thank you, Mr. Sonoff. Mr. Connor, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to now move on to the consent calendar. Any directors like to pull any for further discussion?
So I wanted to pull number 11 and number 19.
Okay, we'll pull number 11 and number 19. Any others?
5 and 6, I can do them together, but 5 and 6.
5 and 6. Any other directors? Okay. Any members of the public wishing to pull any item for further discussion? Okay, then, may I have a motion on the balance of the consent agenda?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Director Potter and a second from Director Byrne Riley. And, yes,
Item number 2 is an amendment to an agreement with the Regional Government Services Authority, which is a staff option available to public agencies.
hey, George.
Anyway, item number 2 is an option on providing staff services without hiring an individual. I think this is a terrific organization. I think that I'm just very pleased that it reflects a serious concern about managing costs and maintaining services within an affordable option. I just think that's a great service. I just want to say I'm glad the district is doing that. That's all I want. That's item number 2.
Okay. Thank you, Director Riley.
Just clarification, Chair. Item number 15, that wasn't an item that we looked at the administrative committee.
It wouldn't be.
Wouldn't be.
Which committee would that have been?
It wouldn't go
Wouldn't
through a
be.
committee. Each director is allowed an appointment to the committee at their discretion.
You know, I understand that. I just didn't know if, I've just wondered who this is. That's all, who's being appointed. And there was no information in the packet, and I just was curious who
Well,
that person
gave
is.
his name.
I'm sure that you can discuss that with Director Potter and get some more information
Oh,
on
that
that
was Dr.
appointment.
Potter's
I
appointment.
believe.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. So all of those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Let's pull 5 or 5 and 6. Director Edwards?
Yeah, page on 19 and 23, but only thing I'd like the general manager to tell me is how these people are being hired. We're hiring 6 and we're hiring 2 or what? I'd like the public to know how we're hiring these people. Or are they already pre-programmed in, and are we going through a process so everybody get a shot at it?
Yeah, so we are going through a process. But first off, the limited term employees under 5, think of those as the district's traditional summer hires. And under 6, think of those as hires we're making on behalf of a researcher from National Marine Fisheries Service out of Santa Cruz in order to source those locally for their research work rather than hiring Santa Cruzians and having them commute 2 to 3 hours every day. So a little bit different, the two. And we typically look for master's degree level summer available students in these kind of positions, but occasionally there's other limited term employees in other settings that are looking for additional limited term work, so they have 2 limited term contracts. So we advertise through, well, I guess we're getting a little more savvy, but Craigslist locally, which one? Yeah, CalApp's a governmental site. I don't know if we did it through the online job board. We have used that for other positions. Yeah. We also make it known in like the CSUMB Water Resources Program that these positions are becoming available. And so we'll get a set of candidates and vet them and interview and hire.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So
Any
we
other-
need a motion to approve those 2 items?
Was it for both?
Yeah, it was for both of them, and I move that we approve 5 and 6.
Second?
Okay, before I call a question, I'd like to open this item up to public comment. Okay, seeing none. Any further discussion by the board? Okay, so just to clarify, that was a motion by Director Edwards and a second by Director Byrne. So all of those in favor? Aye. Okay, so that was 5 and 6. We'll move on to item number 11.
So 11, I just would like to have that referred back to the Public Outreach Committee, because we haven't had a chance, we haven't had a meeting in a long time, and I would like to kind of have the opportunity to go over what the focus is. So we need a motion on that. I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
to bring it back, right?
To bring it back.
To bring it back
send
to
it
the
back to
public.
committee, yeah.
Right, so the motion would be to send it back to Public Outreach Committee.
On the second, if I may, I was gonna pull that, but we got a lot of these in there. I hope that all the committees are looking at this, and I would just wonder how much time it takes to put out an RFP. I'm talking about the full, all of them, and get that back so they be ready for the next budget, or ready for those next committees that's coming up, and should we approve them or whatever, and see what else is out there. And, you know, I seen one in here been quite a while, and if they stay with it, but it might be, they ain't doing nothing.
Yeah,
But who else?
several of the recommendations were to have the committees evaluate this year and possibly go back out to the street. Others were not that way. They're not all consistent with each other. Some are, take
Right.
a look, some are.
So how much time? Do you start at the beginning of the year to do this? And so it'd be ready for the next budget? That's why I'm bringing it up now, because I prefer seeing it done at the beginning of the year, so it'd be ready for budget time, like right now, for next budget.
Well, on this item, I just would like it to come back to the public outreach so that we can focus on what is being done and what could be done.
And my comments is for future.
Right.
When should we start?
His comments get addressed in item 24 if we receive direction from you that includes the contract specialist, then we're more likely in a position to be able to do that than.
Oh, that's
less
what
likely.
that person for. Okay. You might approve that one. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to open this item up for public comment. Seeing none, we have a motion from Director Byrne to send this item back to the Public Outreach Committee, seconded by Director Adams. Any further discussion? Okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
And
Item number 19.
19, I would like to approve the 75% credit, but have the discussion on the 2 meters brought back to water demand.
What'd you find out about the 2 meters?
Okay, directors, any discussion on that? Would
Could, I just ask, could you repeat what you just said? Because I was looking and not listening.
I would like to approve the 75% credit and bring the item of the 2 meters back to water demand. There's a meter required on the gray water system.
Ms. Locke, please.
Thank you. This item was discussed during the Water Demand Committee meeting. This is a new water credit for a gray water toilet flushing system. So, and the project that brought this to us is an apartment complex where they want to dual plumb to collect gray water from the showers and sinks, bathroom sinks, to be able to flush the toilets. So we came forward with a proposal to reduce the fixture unit count for the toilets that are used in this type of a situation. We had Roger Van Horn from the Health Department, County Health Department, at the meeting, held a discussion about it. The committee actually did discuss the metering. And the reason for the metering is because we need to know how much gray water is being used in this project. And we need to know, and it has a potable water backup, which is why we're not giving 100% reduction on the fixture unit count. But we need to be able to assess whether our estimate of the backup needs is appropriate or not, whether we need to adjust that factor in the future. So we would need to know how much gray water is being used and how much potable water is being used in the system. So that was the purpose, and it was discussed as part of the.
And I'd still like to bring that back to water demand and have some actual data on how much is that really going to cost and how is it feasible in terms of the plumbing.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about, will it work? Is there a central
Yeah, right.
point that you can meter all the gray water and so forth?
But the
Yeah.
motion also approves the 75% credit.
directors? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll open that up to public comment. Okay, I'll close public comment on this item. Directors, any further discussion?
Move approval to bring it back and move approval for the 75%.
Okay.
Second.
I thought you had made the
I
motion.
made the motion,
She made the
so-
motion.
I
so-
second it
okay.
then.
That's
Okay,
cool.
who's
It's cool.
on
We got
first?
this. All right, so we have a motion from Director Byrne to approve the fixture reduction credit and, but to bring the question of metering back to Water Demand Committee for further discussion. And we have a second from Director Edwards. Further discussion?
Yeah, just a little bit. The actual resolution refers to rainwater/gray water, and so I would hope that part of that,
Well, it's
further
all
look
part
at.
of the gray water, yeah,
um,
system.
yeah,
The-
well,
The rainwater and the gray water are all in the same system when it goes to the flushing the toilets.
well,
It's not a separate plumbed system for each.
okay, so as you go, thank you for the clarification.
That,
Yeah.
okay, you good, good. All right, anything else? Okay, so there was a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And motion carries. So that covers us on pulled consent items.
Excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Evans, did you take a vote on approving the remainder of the consent
Yeah, the
calendar?
We did that
The
A
motion
motion and a second,
For,
approving the remainder. I
yes,
never
approving the
heard a
balance.
vote and a second, and you did vote on it, okay.
Right.
Yes, I
Thank
believe
you, I'm
we
sorry to
we did.
interrupt.
No, that's okay. Thank you for keeping us honest. I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, no, we did.
Okay.
We voted on the main.
Just making sure. Okay, item 21, General Manager's Report.
And I want to thank you for not pulling the appropriations limit off of the consent calendar and asking us how to compute it.
Yeah.
Um,
Since nobody had the answer for that.
I need to track down the remote. So this is the normal monthly report with a little twist on a couple of tables. Just want to highlight that actual versus budget or actual versus target is still tracking pretty favorably, so we're below budget. That's be the right-hand gray column. And we're primarily below budget due to river pumping as opposed to seaside pumping, which is a little over budget. But also, more importantly, we're below last year. And there's only, both numbers include ASR. ASR last year. So for accounting purposes, we capped the ASR included in the river number at 600 acre feet. And last year was a total of 530 acre feet. So there's a difference of 70, yet we're still 100 acre feet, 130 acre feet below. So that's another positive sign. On actual production, I see the mayor has left, but Sand City did produce last month, about 11 acre feet. And the table 13, higher is a good number, so exceeding the target is okay, because that's based on kind of after the fact, going back and looking at flows taken from the river, and so a good water year allows you to get more table 13 water right. On production for delivery for customer service, which again is our measure of demand, you can see the total year-to-date, 5916, is below last year to date by almost 200 acre feet. That's a very positive sign. We've been tracking demand, and demand is quite a bit below where it was when the cease and desist order was issued. And the rationing trigger, we're in no risk of rationing at this time with the 12-month rolling average compared to our
So, excuse me, I
Yeah.
think
production
our
limit.
packet doesn't show what you have on the screen because.
That's because the numbers were wrong and fixed at the last minute.
Okay, I was gonna say somehow that didn't
So
compute.
I think your packet, the water year 2018 doesn't match.
Right, it says 5273.
Yeah.
Thought maybe I was reading the wrong chart.
No, but I'm actually inspired to know that you've been reading it, so. There was a question about this, and lo and behold, we have the answer. So at our budget committee meeting, this subject was brought up, and so I wanted to just walk you through the effect of missing a milestone. We have what's called an effective diversion limit, which is imposed by the state when the cease and desist order was extended, and that number is 8,310 acre-feet per year that you're allowed, the company's allowed to take from the Carmel River. That number at the time kind of evolved as a 5-year average, but it was a 5-year average roughly in 2014 when we first started having discussions. But nevertheless, that's the number that the state allows to be withdrawn from the Carmel River. If you miss a milestone in progress of construction of the water supply project, you run the risk of taking 1,000 acre-feet off the effective diversion limit. It's an elective 1,000 acre-feet if the state board's executive director doesn't provide relief and waive the requirement. He does have the, or it's she now, she does have the authority to waive the 1,000 acre-feet if the reason for the delay was not California American Waters, the districts, or the mayor's authority. But this assumes that they hit the penalty. The effective diversion limit is now 7,310. And then you back off Sand City desal that's being used by Cal-Am for general service use, which, last year, 190 acre-feet. And then last year's production from the Carmel River of 6,648, that does include 530 acre-feet of diversion for injection of aquifer storage and recovery. That's what the asterisk means, but I lost my footnote apparently. So if all things remained the same as 2018, we would have a surplus of 472 acre-feet, even with the one step missing of the effective milestone. And recall from my previous slide, we're actually tracking 150 to 200 acre-feet below last year. So this is using last year's value. What would happen if we missed another milestone? So this is the 2 milestone. So that 8310 goes to 6310, less Sand City delivered for general use, 190. Actual from Carmel River, again, that same number from 2018. Well, we'd actually be short. We'd be in the red, if you will, 528 acre-feet based on last year's data. But because of good behavior since 2016 water year, actual diversions versus the effective diversion limit represent a savings that can be banked, or a what we call carryover credits. So those credits have been accumulating, and now with some revisions to the way the charts are submitted annually, there's about 3,793 acre-feet of credit. You can't get 1,000 acre-feet out of your bank, so the idea of missing a milestone and losing 1,000 is only offset by the ability to take 750 out. So the state said, sure, we'll give you some credit for good behavior, but you can't take it all to offset a lost milestone. So in this case, because we're only 528 acre-feet short, we take 528 out of that 3,700, and we would still be under our 750 per year max. So all things remaining the same as what's happened in 2018 with these numbers, we would be okay through 2 misses of a milestone. Director Evans' comment on Thursday holds true that we wouldn't go straight to rationing in either case, that we would use either what's called conservation rates, which are penalty rates for economic rationing, before you get to actual rationing. But even before you would get to that, if we were in one of these situations where we said, well, it's going to be close, then we go to stage 2, which is greater public outreach and enforcement. And if we were going to go negative and know that we had to hit the carryover credit, we might even go further and go into the penalty rates phase. But at this point, the numbers don't lie. That's where we're at, and we could probably certainly sustain 1 missed milestone, and very likely 2. Back on the water year data, we ended up at 30.93 inches. Oops. which is 147% of long-term average, and it puts us in the wet year category. It would take 1 more inch to get into the extremely wet, actually 0.6 of an inch. The cutoff is 31.5 inches. And then this is the actual rain gauge out near San Clemente, and I just wanted to point out that May was very active and actually was about 2 times normal, or 2.5 times normal May. So that late rain really helped. And on the unimpaired flow, the almost 140 acre feet that the river passed this winter makes it an extremely wet year. So that is over into the top category for wet water years. It's about 216% of long-term average. And our current usable storage, which is basically the aquifer under the river, the lower reach of the river, we're at 101% of long-term average. So we're in really good shape. And then finally, aquifer storage and recovery ended the last day of May, last month, and we topped out at 1,335 acre feet. So it was our second best year ever. It leaves a little bit to be desired compared to our best year ever, but nevertheless, it was a good year. And John Lear and his team and the Cal-Am team need to be commended for taking the new toy that came online right before the rainy season started and at least getting something out of it. So that concludes the GM report.
What year was the best year ever?
2017.
Ah, yes, I remember it well.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions from directors? Director Edwards.
Yes, General Manager, why did we start pumping from Seaside early? Did we have a problem? Not all that rain, but we pumping from Seaside.
No, we didn't hit our, so when you say pumping from Seaside, you mean?
We started pumping, I think I heard you mention we started pumping Seaside, or Seaside was over or under, or?
Well, we didn't meet our water rights criteria until ASR was really ready to go. So there was a window where we were concerned that the new Monterey Pipeline pump station on Hillby was going to require hand operation, and SCADA wasn't ready to go. But because we didn't meet our criteria with the river flowing until we did, SCADA system was up and operating. And then there were some other balancing of pressures and so forth. But adding a new pipeline and pump station right at the start of the season, obviously there's going to be some quirks, but it wasn't like we were waiting around. The river conditions wouldn't let us go any sooner than we did.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
The effective diversion limit issue, you mentioned that, and I've understood this for some time, but this is kind of a process question. If there's a missed milestone, and it's not the fault of 3 agencies you mentioned, Cal-Am, this agency, and the mayor's authority. But CDO is filed against the Cal-Am, but not the other agencies. But what's the agreement on how the response, if it's not anyone's fault, who puts that material together? What's the obligation of the district to make that case, or is it Cal-Am's responsibility? It's just a question of how the 3 parties participate in responding to that.
Yeah, I don't think it's been diagrammed. Obviously, we would push pretty hard for it because, if the ability to waive it is out there, then you start with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to invite anybody who's still in the front room, if you'd like to come into the main area. There are still a few seats here, so just letting you know. We'll move on to number 22, the attorney's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The board did meet in closed session for 3 items at 6 p.m. Those 3 items were a conference with labor negotiators. The board considered the general staff bargaining unit and the management bargaining unit and provided general direction to its labor negotiator, your general manager. The other 2 items on the agenda were pending and threatened litigation. There are 2 matters And as to those matters, a status report was provided, but no reportable action was taken. That concludes my report.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. We'll move on to number 23, Director's Reports, including AB 1234, reports on trips, conferences, conference attendance, and meetings. Any directors have any reports for us this month?
I have one brief report. I need to apologize to the district. I was supposed to go to a meeting last week, and I didn't because I didn't even remember to do that. So, my demerit. But anyway, I don't have a report for that meeting last week.
Which meeting?
Watermaster.
Oh, man.
Oh, no.
There's going to be
Oh,
some
I
pretty
didn't really
significant
appreciate
attendance for
that.
that. You'll be joining Director Potter in the doghouse on that one.
I went, but I don't remember what happened.
Oh my goodness. You're in the doghouse as well. Goodness.
Stop showing our age. We need to stop showing our age up here.
Okay, any other report? Okay, on that note, number 24, discussion item, provide guidance to general manager regarding proposed reorganization of the district.
Right, and I gave a fairly detailed presentation during our budget session, so I thought it'd be appropriate to just rest on that laurel. But to remind you, the the proposal is to to go back to a 4-division framework, fill the 2 division manager positions, which are the next 2 items, create but don't fill 3 positions throughout the org chart: the senior water resources engineer, the accounting/contract specialist, and the assistant fisheries biologist. And then we would come to the board for authority to go out for any of those positions to actually begin filling them. I think we still need to assess, as we have a new person coming on in the accounting office specialist type role. We have to see what her skill set's going to be and what she can take on. A lot of the movement with the retiring of division managers and the new assignments, there's some just identification of labor needs and how much recurring project work there's going to be after next year and so forth that we need to do anything with those 3 positions. So, but they are in the budget, so as you approve a budget number, obviously they won't be in there for a full year, so there'll be a little bit of additional monies due to each of their positions, but we're kind of holding that as a placeholder to cover any labor negotiation increases, so it all kind of balances out. With that, this is not an action item. It was more a matter of having had a chance to see the presentation on Thursday and mulling it over. Is this a direction you want to go in? And so it's just a general.
Okay, directors? Well, your presentation Thursday was impressive.
Great, then we'll move forward as planned and we'll come back to you.
Okay, sounds good. We'll move on to action items. Number 25, consider converting the senior hydrogeologist position to water resources manager position.
Oh, an important note in the exhibits under 24, since our public is with us, the entire organization chart works for the board. So there's a board box that you don't see in there.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
I
so
thought you
item,
were going to revise that for this meeting.
board packet had already been produced. So the first one, item 25, is converting the senior hydrogeologist position to the water resources manager position. This is Jonathan Lear. He would be heading up the water resources division, which would now exclusively be water-related, gauging-related monitoring and data for both groundwater and surface water.
That concludes your report.
And I'm sorry, that concludes my report.
Do any directors have any questions of our general manager?
One question, probably a couple on them. That person that's moving up into a management, well, you probably there in management, do we have to fill below that? Some of
Right.
the duties that he's doing right now, he's gonna be doing more duties, but are we gonna fill those duties for somebody to get out in the field? He's our number one to get out in the field and check on Cal-Am.
Yeah, so that goes back to what I said earlier about trying to figure out where the demands are for additional work. So, 6 months into it, we'll be working with John to figure out what he wants to offload or should be offloaded and what to do about it. The idea here is, so Maureen Hamilton, who just passed her PE, which I think I may have mentioned before, is currently the water resources engineer. So the senior water resources engineer and the water resources engineer kind of are doing the things that Maureen and Larry are doing. We've moved Henrietta's water distribution system permit work to Stephanie's division a couple of years ago. So we just need to see where this workload falls, and it's absolutely a concern, but we think we have the positions that are available to do something about it.
So next year you won't be coming back and asking for another person, or do we need to consider that person now?
Right. No, I think we might remake the water resources engineer position if we need something more along the lines of what John had been doing. But by creating that position in that division, we'll have some flexibility to do just this. So.
Okay, and just going back to water demand just quickly, is that person, Henrietta, I remember was doing that, and she was sort of like an engineer, wasn't she? If I can remember.
Well, she was a project manager, so she had a planner background, but it was in planning and engineering. The process can be simplified, has been simplified. We rewrote some of the rules, but we've got 2 people that share that work now, and they've been doing a terrific job. So,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions from directors?
I move approval of converting the position.
Second?
Yeah, I'm going to go to public comment. Pardon?
Sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
Public
So,
comment.
so I'm going to open this up to public comment.
Here you go.
And seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. We do have a motion to approve the position and salary range. That was Director Riley, and a second from Director Byrne.
No,
No.
there was Director Edwards?
Yeah, I said second,
Okay,
but
Director
anybody
Edwards.
can take that credit
Well,
for
I'd
raising
like to give
somebody's
credit where
salary.
credit's due. All right, any further discussion? Okay, then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to number 26. Consider converting the riparian projects coordinator position to environmental resources manager position.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one's very similar. You may recall from Thursday night's presentation that riparian habitat on the river was in planning and engineering, and fisheries was in water resources under the old configuration from 3 years ago. There was a desire to put them in the same place, and that never happened, so fisheries pod just kind of floated, reporting directly to the general manager. Now the goal is to bring all of that environmental mitigation work under one roof. Thomas Christensen would be that person. He's been running the riparian habitat coordination for quite some time. So he would take on overseeing both riparian habitat and fisheries. And then there's some other work that's going to get shifted into that division related to, so like all these Los Padres Dam studies have become much more about mitigation than about projects. So he's going to take that on from Larry Hampson. The fish passage study will be a project that's in that division as well. So everything that's related to our environmental resources will be in there. There's one of our strategic planning goals is a sustainability plan for the district. It'll probably get slotted into this division as well, even though it'll span across all the divisions. So with that, I have recommended that you authorize the conversion of this position and the associated salary range.
Okay, directors, any questions?
Go ahead, Derek.
Just, I don't know, just for me, it seemed as if sustainability under the conservation aspect as opposed to environmental, but that's a workload thing for you to decide, but it just seems a better fit to me.
Yeah, it's probably going to really end up in his division because the implementation is going to be solar panels here and more energy saving things there. It's kind of a facilities issue, but we'll find it a home.
Okay, Director Edwards, you had a question?
Yes, and in that division, we adding more, like, fishery people? We
Yeah, so-
added one, or
Yeah,
we
so
added
we-
two, they're going up to 5 or something?
Yeah, we'd be adding one at the point in time when the fish weir, so basically a fish weir is a physical counting facility so that the fish get trapped on a daily basis and a person has to go out and see what they got, and could create an opportunity for additional tagging. But once that item is ready to go, then that would be the person who would be brought on, but not exclusively for that job. We'd like all 3 fisheries biologists, including, 4 if you include the senior fisheries biologists, to at least know what they're doing, that they can each do each other's job. So
And what is this environmental resource person?
that's just a renamed division. So we used to have the Water Resources Division and the Planning and Engineering Division. We've now made the 2 environmental functions that used to be in 2 divisions into 1, so we're just renaming the division.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'd like to open it up to public comment.
Judy Lehman, I have to commend you. I think along with Mr. Christensen, you have an excellent staff, and I'm glad to see them be able to aspire and take in additional positions. So you've done a great job. It sounded a little more complicated than it needed to be, but I thank you for allowing that and promoting your staff from within. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lehman.
Good evening, Tom Raleigh. Saying it's great to hear that the, I guess it's the fish ladder study. I think there was some more money in one of the reports today to go to finish that study. It ran over. And I can remember talking to your former general manager, having just finished a riverboat cruise in Europe where we went through over 60 locks, and they had seemed to solve the magic of how you get fish ladders to work. And I came back and asked, well, why can't we get the fish ladders to work for the Los Padres Dam? And I was basically given the old soft shoe and not really a good answer, but we're studying it some more. So it's finally, how many years later, 15 years later, to see that finally there's going to be a study. I look forward to hearing the results of that study when it's given to you, because that's always one of the things that's been, I won't say hyped, but mentioned about why the Los Padres Dam isn't, let's tear it down, or, that it's not really effective and the fish ladder isn't adequate, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, this is something engineering-wise that other people, at least in Europe, they figured out how to do it. I would hope our American ingenuity can similarly figure out how to have effective fish ladder. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raleigh. Anyone else? Okay, then I will close public comment.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion. We have a motion from Director Potter and a second from Director Byrne. Any further discussion?
Yes, just one more question. Dave, some of these positions, have we thought about going to the outside, advertising to the outside to find people that might have a little bit better skill until we can bring our other people up to that level? I'm not trying to keep nobody out of job, but just, are we looking?
Yeah, absolutely. And the 3 newly created positions would be exactly that, subject to a search and posting. We did have issues last time. We posted a professional position, which was the senior water resources engineer. We ended up reducing the requirements and reposting it as water resources engineer. But getting candidates can be challenging. But we will definitely post those.
And I agree, just as long as we're going out there looking.
Yeah.
And then bring it back.
Yeah.
So I agree it's hard, but as long as we out there, letting the world know that we're looking, these people are if they're not out there, they're not out there. We got good people.
Yeah, and a good example, we went out for the river, just call it a river specialist. We had 2 guys who spend time both depends on the season, but doing physical labor on the river as well as data collection and so forth. And I think we had about 11 candidates or something. Turned out, of the finalists, staff knew 3 of them, and we ended up hiring somebody who'd worked with us 6 years ago. So, but we do the search anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah. Probably longer ago than 6.
Okay.
10, yeah.
So we had a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And we will move on to item number 27, first of our public hearings. Consider the first reading of ordinance number 183, adding Rule 20-E, establishing a zone of controlled drinking water well construction and a zone of potential controlled drinking water well construction related to pure water Monterey injection of highly purified water. And can we shorten the title for next time?
Well, I'll show you why it's called that. So, Chair Evans, members of the board, this is the first public hearing of the first reading of Ordinance 183. So to summarize the ordinance, it's going to establish what's called the Pure Water Monterey Control Zones for construction of drinking water wells. Reason why we're doing that is the Title 22 regulations, which regulate the use of drinking water as well as recycled or highly treated water, require that, I heard it said earlier in the meeting, that require a 6-month travel time in order to have all of the viruses removed right now. So there has to be a study conducted, and you have to see where these waters will travel once you introduce them into the ground, and then you need to protect those areas so people are not allowed to put drinking water wells in. And so this is a requirement for us to get the permit in order for us to start injecting in the project. So this ordinance will establish Rule 22E that will show how this is enforced, and we'll put into our practices and our permitting process to catch this if this were to be, a permit were to come. It's been reviewed by our council, and it was developed in kind with the Department of Drinking Water, their recycled water unit. So Title 22, Section 603-20200 is where you see where it requires the 180-day travel time in order to achieve full, they call it logarithmic virus removal credits. And if you read further down into it, and you go to Part E, Part 2, it says you need a zone of controlled drinking water well construction with a 180-day travel time away from the wells, and you need a secondary zone of potential controlled drinking water construction requiring a study to be done to, if you put another well in this 2-year travel time, would operating that well cause water to get to that well faster than the required 6-month travel time? So you have to go into a larger area of study. So what does that, oh, all my labels didn't. Okay. So what we have here is we have the setting of our project where we're trying to achieve injection of 3,500 acre-feet of highly treated water, 30% into the Paso Robles aquifer, 70% into the Santa Margarita aquifer. It's going to be done between 2 deep injection wells into the Santa Margarita, 2 Vados zone wells into the Paso Robles, and we have clusters of monitor wells, which will be required to do a tracer test once we start injecting to prove that this travel time is actually what we've modeled. Then we have all of our ASR wells that are sitting just a little bit east of that. So these wells would be the ones that we would expect to see this injected water show up first, and as well as we have a number of Cal-Am production wells. And then to the very north, we have our ASR 3 and 4 wells injecting Carmel River water. When we focus in on this cross-section, we can see that we have on the left side of the cross-section, we have the deep injection well too. So that's a pure water Monterey well. And then if you step over, we have a monitor well, and then we have a Vados zone well. So these are the wells that will be injecting from the pure water Monterey. And they're injecting in, the Vados zone well is actually injecting into the aroma sand, which is all the dune sands you see out on Fort Ord. And beneath that, around sea level, we have a transition into the Paso Robles aquifer. the water that's put into the Vado zone wells will eventually reach down into the Paso Robles aquifer. In between the Paso Robles aquifer and the Santa Margarita aquifer, there is a confining layer, so groundwater does not flow between the two aquifer zones, and the water that's injected into the deep injection well will travel away from those wells and those well sites. So that's why we have to focus on both of the different zones, and we had targeted the different zones. So we used the Seaside Basin Water Master model that was used to establish a lot of the ratios in the natural safe field in the Seaside decision, and the Seaside Water Master uses this to guide the water resources decisions. It's a mod flow based model. It's the same model that we used in the Pure Water Monterey EIR. And then we also went out and we worked closely with CalAm to develop realistic pumping scenarios for their wells, how they would use their wells to recover the extra water that had been injected into the through Pure Water Monterey into the Seaside Basin. We also used historic Carmel River flows, so we would have realistic hydrology. So we would have droughts, we would have wet years, and we would have the cyclical nature of the river. And we worked with Pure Water Monterey and Monterey One Water to create realistic Pure Water Monterey operations of how the water were to be injected to build up the operational reserve, to build up the drought reserve. And then we also made sure, because the Pure Water Monterey is not quite enough water to lift the CDO, that all of the pumping scenarios that we had gone through would comply with all of the state rights, board orders, and all the water rights associated with recovering all the water. So what you're actually seeing here is, with these scenarios that we programmed into the model, we're injecting water into the Santa Margarita sandstone, and then the water is traveling to where it's ultimately being picked back up by drinking water supply wells. And on the legend, you can see where you look at the transition from the 3 to 6 months and then the 6 to 9 months. So that would be kind of your oranges to yellows. That's the area that is the water has to travel before a drinking water well can pick it up. So that would define the 6-month zone for the deep injection wells injecting into the Santa Margarita aquifer. Also, you would then look and find the transition from the 18 to 24 and 24 to 30 months, color transition in green, and that defines your 2-year travel time. So that's the secondary zone for injecting into the Santa Margarita aquifer. So this is the zones established with the same set of parameters we've gone through, but looking at the travel times in the Paso Robles aquifer and where they would be picked up. So the recovery wells are in different aquifers as well as the injection wells, and so they would travel, but we would look for these same transition points in travel time, and we would identify those as the shapes that would make these zones up. And so when you do that, the primary control zone is the dotted lines that are smaller, that are held into the slightly smaller pin line on the outside. That's the black line. And so you have a control zone for the Santa Margarita aquifer, 6-month travel time, which is slightly larger than the control zone for the Paso Robles aquifer because water travels faster in the Santa Margarita aquifer. And then you have the control zone, one control zone for the entire project for both aquifers that represents the longest 2-year travel path of either of the two zones. So that's graphically what this looks like. So the ordinance, when you read through it, it also talks about adopting a new zone, because this is a model that has created these areas on this map. We're also required at startup to do an injection test, a tracer test. So we inject the water and we watch for the travel times to show up in the wells. Once they show up in the wells, Department of Drinking Water has said they're going to want us to take our model and calibrate it to those results and thus run the model again, because They want the model to represent the travel times in the droughts when the ASR wells are not injecting water and the pure water Monterey wells are injecting water, thus representing the fastest travel time scenario. So we have to, because we're not in that scenario now, when we're starting our tracer test, we're taking this tracer test, recalibration, and then at that time, we will rerun the model, looking at finding the fastest travel times over the time we ran the model, and then we will be able to readopt this map by resolution and put that back in. But we have to adopt something and have it in place before we're allowed to inject, before we're allowed to do the tracer test. So how will this work? We'll have a control zone, 180-day travel time. We're going to create Rule 22E by this ordinance if it passes, and it will use the permit process where if a well is to be drilled within our district boundaries, Monterey County Environmental Health will give us the permit to comment on. We will look and see if it's within this zone, and if it's within this zone, we will say that's within this zone, you can't drill this well. Also, it will work like that with the secondary control zone. We will get the permit from the county, we'll review it. If it's within the zone, we'll work with the applicant to say what type of information would be needed to prove that this well is not going to start intercepting water with a faster than 6-month travel time. And so, just like any other of our permitting, we work with the proposed applicant, but the cost of the study would be borne by the applicant, with us leading them through the permit process. So the important findings that we thought in this ordinance were that there's an agreement between Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, Monterey County Water Resources Agency, and the Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency that recognized that they had overlapping zones and who would take the lead of different functions. And so this says that the protection of, as the Fort Ord boundary was in 1993, the protection of the groundwater and the groundwater quality lies on the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. So that's why this is the appropriate place for this ordinance to go through. And the establishment of the control zones in this area will not have adverse effects on the ability of any of the water purveyors in this area to have source areas for their systems, because this area is going to be incorporated into the city of Seaside when it's given the land from the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, and will be developed according to the general plan. And the agreement, the 3-agency agreement, gives Monterey County Water Resources Agency the authority to regulate the water source and the delivery systems within the former Fort Ord boundary. And the county has recognized Marina Coast Water District as a purveyor to serve these areas that are going to be developed in the city of Seaside. So they cannot drill wells. They have to serve water to this community, but cannot drill wells in the Seaside Basin because they're not named. So they will not be seeking to drill wells in this area, and it will be within the city limit, which does not allow private wells. So, and the last thing is, it's recognized that the Title II regulations are currently being reviewed by the state of California, and what they're calling raw water augmentation, or we call it direct potable use of highly treated water, may be permitted. They're saying that the draft regulations are estimated to come out in 2023. I asked if that meant we could sunset the control zones at that time because it wouldn't require a 6-month travel time, and they said that that was going to be a separate permitting process, and if we wanted to re-permit Pure Water Monterey to be that, we could, and we could sunset the zones at that time. So the staff recommendation would be for the board to receive public comment on the first reading for Ordinance 183 and approve the first reading and schedule the ordinance for a second reading and adoption on July 15, 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Lear. Any directors have questions for staff?
The drought condition test will come later. Is that likely to expand this radius of concern or shrink it?
It would expand the radius of concern, so it's a conservative setting up of your zones. Yeah.
Trying to figure out what a drought condition impact.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. If phase 2 ever go online for pure water, do you have to go through this process again?
Yes.
So you couldn't keep it in place, you just gotta start all over.
Well, you would have the tools in place, which are the modeling, and you would set up a new scenario, and you would do the same analysis, and likely through resolution, you would just adopt control zones for the new project.
Okay, and was the city of Seaside that pumped out of there, were they advised of this ordinance going in?
We brought this to the Water Master Technical Advisory Committee at the last meeting, and they're a member, and they had members there, and they didn't seem to have an issue with it.
Okay. I think that's all I got for right now.
Madam Chair, if I might. So does this have any effect on any existing wells in the area?
It does. It has the ASR 1 and 2 wells are within the zone of secondary, requiring a study that proves that they will not receive water within 6 months. However, they exist, so they've already been shown that they don't receive water within 6 months. So it will not affect any well within the area to have to stop operating because they were present during the analysis.
All right, so private wells on private property that we might not know about?
No, in fact, this control zone, if you look at it, it doesn't go, it barely goes down to general Gemmore, so that's all not developed.
If I may, this ordinance proposes permitting of construction permits. So if a well does not require a construction permit, it would not come within the scope of this regulation.
But if it was an existing well, it wasn't permitted, which is highly probable in that area, what's the health protection?
It would not fall within this unless they were going to get a construction permit. But I can't comment as to the impact on the unknown well.
Yeah, I mean, in this area, it's the area that's going to be given over to Seaside, so there's been no development in this area. So I think that the likelihood of having an unknown well in this particular area would be low, unless it was an old well that was abandoned by the Army, and at which that point in time it would have to be brought into the district regulations to reactivate it, and we would catch it.
Any other questions?
Yes, I just remembered it. Did you talk to next door about what you're doing?
Yes.
They're aware of what we're doing and everything. I just want to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, in the first slide, we said that the ordinance has gone through, and we've been working with the Department of Drinking Water, the recycled unit, and we have a joint team between Monterey One Water and our team. And some of that work we've been doing, we've been having panels with the Regional Water Control Board, Department of Drinking Water, and Monterey One Water, and our whole team. So this is, they helped me with some of the language for this.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Good job.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we'll open it up to public comment.
Good evening, Rudy Fisher. Having been associated with Monterey One Water, obviously I'm going to speak in favor of this. I think creating ordinance 183 and Rule 20E. Well, I got to tell you, you have so many rules. I can't. I used to have a book that I had them all and was accurate. I think it's way out of date. But I'm going to speak in favor of this because I think this is the responsible thing to do. You know, very early on, we knew that we were going to have to deal with at least 180-day travel time. And when I first saw the 2-year, I kind of went, what? So I really appreciate John's great explanation of the fluid situation. This is, in my mind, is another instance of both your agency's leadership and your cooperation with other agencies. I think as Mr. Stolt very well knows, we used at least one of your employees to help with the injection wells and the monitoring wells and all that, and that was a huge help for Monterey One Water. I think this is almost the final step to allow a highly cost-effective and environmentally sound source of water to become available to all of us. And I think the water is going to be flowing in into the sand here by the third quarter, I think. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that everyone will vote no. I'd love to see a unanimous vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, then we'll bring it back to the board.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Director Byrne and a second from Director Edwards. Any further discussion? Okay, this is a roll call vote. Arlene?
Director Riley?
Yes.
Director Potter? Director Hoffman?
Yes.
Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Byrne?
Yes.
Director Edwards?
Yes.
And Director Evans?
Yes.
Unanimous approval.
Well done. Okay, we will move on to item 28, consider adoption of July through September 2019 quarterly water supply strategy and budget. Welcome back, Mr. Lear.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Arlene. So this public hearing is for you to consider the adoption of the July to September 2019 quarterly water budget strategy for the California and American water systems, both satellite and main system. The quarterly water budget is developed in accordance with the state board orders that regulate the timing and where water can be produced out of the resource system. And starting back from 1995 and running through what we call the cease and desist order. It also is consistent with the Rule 160 targets that are set up to guide us on how we're tracking, how we're doing as we're producing water throughout the year. The ASR recovery plan is a large component of this water budget, the July through September, because we will begin to pull the water out of the ground that we've stored in the ground over the winter time, thus shifting pumping off of the river and pushing all of the system savings back onto the river. So we, as Dave said, we had a 1,336 acre feet injected into the ground over this last water year, 2019. We did inject that under our water rights of the 2808 A and C water rights, and there was a balance when we started injecting of 470 coming from water year 2018, giving us a total of 1,806 acre feet of ASR in storage in the Seaside groundwater basin. In the past, the Table 13 water rights allowed us to divert 471 acre feet of water under the water right 21330, which is a water right that CalAm has. And when you're within the flow requirements, you're allowed to divert water when the river is high and serve it to the people that are within Carmel Valley and Carmel. So that is also water that doesn't count as diverted against the effective diversion limit. So we took the approach of using the full utilization of the Seaside Basin coastal native waters in order to push the most savings we can onto the river during the critical times. It assumes in this 3-month period the recovery of 1,240 acre feet in the last quarter of this water year. It also assumes that ASR recovery will begin sometime in June when we hit the trigger of flow that drops below 20 cubic feet per second for 5 consecutive days at the Garland Park Don Juan Bridge. So that's actually written in one of the orders. So the balance that we recover throughout this water year will be from when we hit this trigger and then the prescribed amounts that we have in the last quarter. And this was developed in concert with MPWMD, CalAm, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Marine Fisheries. So the point to start on this table is to look at the Seaside groundwater basin, where we're removing through the last 3 months, we're removing 100, 194. So that will thus line out this net that we have in the Seaside Basin. And then we have ASR recovery, which will be 400, 400, and 440, making the total we agreed upon. And again, that total amount will be when we hit our trigger in June, added to these 3 months of this last quarter. What we do then is we look at how much water is left in the effective diversion limit in the river, and we look across it, and that's what we see in the upper part of the Carmel Valley table. However, in the last water year of 2018, we saw numbers closer to 567, 518, and 475. So that's the difference between these numbers, and what's left in the effective diversion limit will be our savings, will be the carryover coverage. So that's where that's going to come from for this water year 2019. And so then the numbers add up to the amount of water produced out of each source, and then on the bottom column it says where we're going to use that water. So I wanted to give a little bit of background. Some people are here and will know this, but some people it's kind of a strange concept to the Seaside Basin and the adjudication and where those numbers come in. The adjudication split the Seaside Basin into 4 sub-areas: the northern coastal sub-area, southern coastal sub-area, northern inland, and Laguna Seca. So there's no production out of the northern inland sub-area. It's not developed, it's former Fort Ord. And the Seaside Basin adjudication also assigned a natural safe yield to the coastal area and a natural safe yield to the Laguna Seca sub-area. And it required every 3 years a 10% ramp down by the primary producers in the decision. So the water purveyors that are moving water around, they go through these triennial ramp downs, but the secondary water users, they're called do not, they stay at their allocation because they're not a water purveyor moving water around. So what I wanted to show was the adjudication decision came in and took effect in 2009, and then you go through these series of ramp downs for the entire basin. But to look at the Laguna side, you have an operating yield of 608 acre feet. That's the sustainable pumping out of the Seaside sub-area. It's consumed entirely by the alternative producers. Thus, the allocation by CalAm goes to 0. So that was the reason why we show you this strange table with all the zeros on it all the time. We've gotten to this pot where we're in the zeros. So there is no water. We do realize that there's a production of 300 acre feet on average in this area that will be produced and will be dealt. The CalAm plans to produce it in order to produce the full amount out of the coastal area in order to put the most savings on the river, and has got plans to intertie these so that pumping will stop. And so our recommendation is to adopt the proposed water supply budget for CalAm's Maine and Laguna Seca water systems for water year 2019 for July through September.
And if I could just add, John touched on it, but those zeros are basically the driver behind what you'll be hearing about in the coming weeks. California American will apply for a moratorium on the setting of new meters in the affected areas of the Hidden Hills, Pasadena, also known as Bishop, which are served from the Laguna Seca sub-area. I'd say Ryan Ranch, but there's no residences up here, and we're already under a moratorium.
Okay, directors, any questions? Director Edwards.
Just one quick one. We're bringing water back over to the river. Are we using that new pipeline?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, are you gonna keep us up to it, how it's working? And
Sure.
if it's not working, it's tuned up to come this way. Now, let's hear about the good news that it's going back the other way.
I think that's the plan.
All right, thank you.
Fantastic. Any other questions? And I will open this up to public comment. Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the board. Okay, we have a motion from Director Potter and a second from Director Riley. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And I just wanted to say thank you, John, for that explanation. It was very good to hear that. And on the previous item, your slides with the diagrams, very helpful. Thank you. Okay, moving on to number 29, consider adoption of proposed fiscal year 2019 to 2020 budget and resolution 2019-06.
And I'd like to remind the board that we went in fairly extensive conversation last Thursday at the budget workshop, so our CFO has a shorter presentation, and we could move quickly to action, I think.
Thank you. Chair, members of the board, this would be a very short presentation. Just want to note that the staff note that's in the board packet was replaced by the staff note that was provided with a separate budget packet. So the staff note with the separate budget packet, that's the correct version. And there are some changes that were incorporated from last Thursday's budget to this final budget. Real briefly, those changes were basically this board approved a $100,000 addition project approval to the Sleepy Hollow facility. That was included in this final budget. There were some carryover adjustments that would result in a net zero budget, so we kind of like cleaned that up. The letter of transmittal, there were some text changes. We basically, Chair Evans caught that, which is basically said increase or decrease over last fiscal year. We've corrected that. And then there were some minor editorial and spelling corrections on the budget packets itself. So very minor changes from what was presented last time. Just wanted to remind the board where and how we got to tonight. Basically in April, the divisions made the initial request for the budget itself. On May 10th, we have a team management budget group. They met in budget sessions and made adjustments to the budget. May 20th, we did distribute the budget to the full MPWMD board, but no action was taken at that meeting. It was decided at that meeting that we were going to have a separate budget workshop. June 13, which brings us to last Thursday, we had a budget workshop. We went and discussed the budget in detail, and then brings us to tonight, where basically we'll review the budget again and then adopt the final budget. Just wanted to remind that we did go over the 2004 January 19 board adopted strategy, which was to do annual balanced budgets, maintain all the services that you can as possible, and then maintain a 5% operating reserve, replenish it to about 50% over 5 years. We do have a 87% reserve. We were not able to balance some of the last fiscal year budgets, and that was due to some heavy expenditures on the pure water Monterey project side. The fiscal year 19-20 again does not have a balanced budget without the use of reserves. We are using some reserves, and this is what I mentioned in detail on Thursday. And as I had mentioned, the total reserve balance sits at 87% of the operating budget. So the proposed budget for 19-20 stands at a little over $18 million. This is higher than the 18-19 budget. We do have a full year of user fee revenue budgeted in there. We do have our three primary sources of revenue: the property tax, the water supply charge, and user fee. User fee is the one that's highly unstable, and we do monitor those throughout the year. And we will make adjustments through the mid-year budget if we see changes are necessary. Wanted to show the budget itself in its entirety. As you can see, 48% of the budget does contain project expenditures. The other 52% are distributed into reimbursement projects, personnel costs, service and supplies, fixed assets, and others. Looking at the revenue side, you'll see the big pieces we have. The user fee, which is 28% of the total fee. Water supply stands about 19%, and then property tax at 11%, and then we have some carry forward, and then the fund balance, which is basically use of reserves, and then reimbursement capacity fee projects. So all in all, looking at those two numbers in numbers format, total expenditures $17.4 million. The reserves of $551,000 set aside belongs to mitigation program and conservation program. Water supply is using about $2.5 million of reserve funds. Looking at the district revenues, $11.2 million is what we call the three sources: the property tax, user fee, and water supply charge. And then we have about $1.9 million in reimbursements, which is from CalAm, ratepayers, other external entities like grant funding. And then we have what's called carry forward and reserves. Carry forward is the item that's basically was approved in last fiscal year for projects, but were not carried out, so they moved into this fiscal year, 1920, and then the use of reserves to balance the budget. So that brings it to a little over $18 million to balance the expenditure side. And then looking at the reserves itself, you'll see that the budget was, our 18-19 budget had $13.9 million on the reserve side. But we did complete the year, or we are going to be completing the year with a little higher reserve than what we had anticipated, and that's a result of not doing some of the projects, which gets into the carry forward section. And also the revenues were a little higher than what we had anticipated, both on the property tax side, the user fee side. But again, if you look at the proposed budget, 1920, you'll see that we are going to be, even though we are using the reserves from the budget, we are going to be finishing the year with a little higher than what we had anticipated in the 18-19 budget. So we had started with $13.9 million. Our proposed budget, 1920, we will finish the year off with a little over $14 million. And the footnote there just says, again, phrases that we are going to have 87% of the operating budget. Looking at the revenue itself, you'll see most of it is about 88% is in the general revenue fund, general reserve fund. The rest of them are all the other items which are 2, 4, 2%, and then the other is the pension and the OPEB reserve fund, which is newly created funds from last year. I wanted to remind the board again on the obligations and commitments this district has. We do keep track of all of the obligations. I believe that last Thursday we were talking about the robber bank debt loan. Is that how do we figure out that we have that on the horizon? I mean, this is basically how we do is look at our obligations, commitments, and for the robber bank debt loan, you'll see that that does have a time period in there, June 2023. But some of the other ones, it may or may not happen, but these are what obligations at this point that we feel may come up, and if it does, we do have slated or trying to accumulate reserves for that.
Well, and I think today's discussion at the staff level about some of the discussion we had last Thursday about capital reserves, we will begin to look at, and the back and forth today was whether or not replacement wells for ASR would constitute maintenance or capital, and so we're going to be looking at those this year and trying to identify the.
Yeah, we may bring an item throughout the fiscal year in terms of establishing another reserve fund possibly. So the action, the recommended action tonight is to receive the proposed fiscal year 1920 budget, and then the board adopt resolution 2019-06, which is the resolution of the board of directors adopting the budget for fiscal year 1920.
Okay. Thank you. Directors, any questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
just one. I seen in our in our budget, we had one study session. I think we need to have 2 study sessions there. One to initiate what we probably want to see. I'm glad you brought up a reserve fund for ASR replacement. I also want to talk about that robber bank in there. This board needs to vote on certain things that you may think we should wait to 2023. I think we should put some money in there, and I just want the board to vote on that. And so the public know that we're looking at these recommendations that they bring up. I like the ASR, I was gonna bring that up, that needs to be brought back to this board for a vote. Should we establish that reserve fund for that? And if we have the money in there, I think we can move it. And then, I think if we need to move it again, we can move it again. Thank you. I know that wasn't a question.
Was more of a discussion, but
Yes,
thank you.
I know it.
Next time you have to phrase it in the form of a question.
Yes.
I have a question. In the information packet that we received last Thursday and then in today's budget, the number is different. Our total budget is different by about $260,000. Can you explain where that difference comes from?
Yeah, $100,000 was for the Sleepy Hollow facility that was approved by this board in May. That was the additional expenditure. And then the remainder is basically carry forward of that project. Initially, we had estimated the $270,000 of that project is going to be carried forward into 1920 after Larry Hemson looked at it again, that number changed to a little bit higher number.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to open it up to public comment. Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board.
I'll move the budget approval.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion from Director Adams and a second from Director Byrne. Any further discussion?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I support the board's policy on balanced budgets, but I'm disappointed that this budget proposal shows that the district operating at a deficit and covering the revenue shortfall with operating reserves. But what's more troubling is that the actual budget deficit is much greater than what's being shown. That's because this budget and all previous budgets do not include the district's two largest capital assets, ASR and Sleepy Hollow, in the capital assessment replacement reserve schedule. So that means that no replacement reserves were historically set aside, and no reserves are currently looking to be set aside for these large capital assets. And what that means is that there's an outstanding reserve replacement liability that's not being addressed. So we've got, since ASR was first built, there's this outstanding liability that's out there that we haven't been taking into account, accounting for. And so that's very, very troubling to me. And because the budget does not address this critically important capital replacement reserve for ASR and Sleepy Hollow, I just can't, in good conscience, support the budget.
Okay, thank you, Director Hoffman. Any further discussion?
I just have a question, because wasn't part of that maintenance covered with reimbursable?
Yeah, as the general manager pointed out, that we were just having the discussion today that most of the well rehab, well replacement, all of those come under operations and maintenance, and all of those costs are covered by CalAm ratepayers.
Right.
But we were just talking internally today is basically we'd look at the other part of the ASR system, which is the building and the other facilities, and we may come to the board sometime during the fiscal year to recommend creation of another a reserve fund. But at this point, the amount of infrastructure, the amount of capital that's required for the water supply charge fund, as I mentioned on Thursday night, that this budget includes about $6 million worth of capital work on the Sleepy Hollow, I'm sorry, not Sleepy Hollow, but the ASR facility, the Pure Water Monterey project expansion, and also the Pure Water Monterey project operating reserve. There really isn't any money to set aside for any capital reserve in this fiscal year, but we will definitely be addressing it during the fiscal year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
I would just add that I would like to see the
Turn your mic
Bank loan addressed very specifically as a reserve commitment.
Yeah, that one is, so recall on Thursday, we also briefly talked about the 3-year overlap of collections and the need to establish a policy on sunsetting or establishing but not collecting either the user fee or the water supply charge. So it's all wrapped up in there, so you'll have a chance to look at that this year.
Okay.
And I see Pinnacle Bank is still represented, so we're still looking for that 0% takeout financing.
So we had a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay, motion carries 6-1. There are informational and staff items and staff reports at the back of the packet, to include the report on contracts over $25,000 and the status report on Measure J spending, for those of you who are interested in that. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Well done.